He's suing.
Oh, yeah. No, one of their heating and air conditioning units, it's in the west wing that's vacant right now because they don't have enough.
I don't know, but he's
Staff.
claiming he wants
So
damages.
they've moved some people out of there and moved them into Grandview. So there's
That's a
nobody
little
in that wing and the whole west wing.
bizarre.
And one of the units caught fire.
Call to order the meeting for the Planning and Zoning Commission for Monday, November 8th, 2021.
Right there.
Roll call, please.
Mark Hydrich.
Here.
Mark Klusner.
Here.
Mark Piontek.
Here.
Tom Holtmeyer.
Here.
Sandy Lucy.
Here.
John Borgman.
Here?
Chuck Watson.
Here.
Samantha Wacker. Carolyn Witt.
Here.
Mike Wood.
Here.
Sal Maniaci.
Here.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the October 11th, 2021 meeting.
Motion to approve.
Second.
First and second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Item number 3, file number 211101, extension of C3 district to include 600 West Front Street and 539 West 2nd Street. Sal?
Yes, thank you. Before I begin, I'm going to give a little bit of background here, just because this is a more unique situation and request, in that this is actually, we do not have an applicant. The owners of these properties did not request these rezonings. This is a little bit different situation. As I'm sure you are all aware, over the past 4 months, we have been looking at and finalized the redistricting of our downtown C3 Central Business District zoning, and that was to include a larger area into our downtown and to make it a more uniform growth boundary of identifying what actually is considered downtown Washington, what is appropriate for future downtown development. As you are aware, and I'm sure some people who have been following the stories, our downtown district was not uniform. There were some pockets in it. There was the C3 that wasn't contiguous with other C3s, and we wanted to clean that up. And so this is the new zoning map that was approved last month. You can see this light blue is the new downtown district. So we expanded it to these boundaries, and that has been approved by City Council, and this has all been finalized. As the commission is aware, we looked at that for 3 months, determining what that boundary would be. And so there was discussions whether or not to move it west, whether or not to move it south and to the east. We amended some boundaries here, but this is what we landed on. At the city council meeting that this was approved, it was brought up by a few different councilmen and some audience members of why it didn't continue west to include the Heritage Apartments on that access 2nd Street, but are fronted on Front Street and have that view there, and then Elijah McLean's as well, 600 West Front. And there was some discussion as to why not include that in the boundary of C3. And so just to make it clear what C3, the downtown district, does, it allows for the same uses that are there today currently. Everything that's allowed in C2 is allowed in C3, plus it just allows some residential. The whole point of our C3 downtown district is to allow for mixed use, and that you could have commercial on the ground floor, apartments up top, Airbnbs, you know, that type of mix that we see often in our downtown district. That was part of the reason that sparked the whole discussion, is that we had permits for mixed use structures that really were appropriate for mixed use, but technically they weren't in downtown, so we clean up those boundaries. The uses on both Elijah's and the apartments currently could be, if it were to be approved for C3, those uses could remain just as they are today. The main thing that the C3 downtown district does is it allows 0 lot lines on property lines that don't adjoin single family, so that you could build up to the property line on Front and Stafford. Same with the apartments. And then it also allows for no parking minimums. And that is the main concern here. I won't beat around the bush, as that's been the discussion with these properties, specifically 600 West Front, for over a year now, that when you come into C3, you no longer have to provide any off-street parking. You could build up to the property boundaries and let parking go onto the overflow on public streets, public lots, which is something that we encourage in our downtown district for use of our public lots, and also to discourage the demolition of historic buildings just to have new parking lots made. You know, if someone in the middle of Main and Jefferson wanted to redevelop a property and we said, no, you have to have X amount of parking spaces, and the building is out to the property lines, their only alternative really is to tear down the building and put in a parking garage, or buy property next door and tear down a building. Obviously, we don't want to encourage that in our historic district where 60% of our historic buildings have already been demolished over the years. So that's kind of the background on why that parking regulation is the way it is in city code. So over a year ago, there was a request to rezone Elijah McLean's 600 West Front to C3. It was not contingent with the existing boundary. Obviously, there's still a gap. Let me zoom in here. So these are the two properties here. 600 West Front, Elijah's, is this red is C2, general commercial. All the uses that have today, a hotel, an event center, a private club, that's all allowed in C2 and in C3. So again, the use isn't necessarily the issue. And then obviously the apartments here, that's R3 for multifamily. Again, would be permitted in C3. But like I said, over a year ago, there was a request to bring this into C3. At that time, staff's recommendation was denial on really two main points, is that it wasn't contiguous with existing C3, and we, as staff, had drawn a pretty fine line that we didn't want to approve any C3 that wasn't contiguous, because then at what point do you stop that boundary? If someone were to come in 5 blocks away and want to be in the downtown district, and you approved it just catty corner from them because it was close enough, you know, that is not a good precedent to setting for future rezoning. So that was a large part of wanting to have a designated growth boundary. This is considered downtown. The second part of our recommendation was that 600 West Front, Elijah's, is unique in a situation that it's a large lot here, right on the edge of what is naturally considered our downtown district, and it does have it does adjoin single-family residential. That, especially with the fact that it cuts off Main Street, this is a primarily historically single-family residential district that does not have any mixed use of commercial and single-family. It is not the circumstance that you'd have on Main and Market, where people who have lived there and owned property there for a long time are aware of the situation that you're going to have parking overflows, you're going to have people parking in front of your street for festivals. The argument was that in this case, this neighborhood is not considered downtown necessarily, and overflow parking could be a deterrent to a detriment to the existing property. So again, at the last recommendation of that, or the last request of that, staff's recommendation was in lieu of rezoning, how about that the staff and the property owners, which I understand there's new property owners at this time, so a lot of things have changed, or could change, is that there are alternatives to making sure that they can develop it to the best of their ability, making sure it's a nice fit for downtown and has the highest and best use, while still protecting the integrity of the surrounding properties with not having overflow parking. I think the main concern that was addressed that night from the public is that the fact that there is access at Main and Johnson there to the subject property, that patrons that come to this, and when they don't, if they don't want to walk up that hill, will park on the residential streets first and walk through that access point. And that also is their emergency access, so it's not something as easy as just closing off. There have to be a parking plan essentially put into place. And so staff's recommendation really was, well, you could ask for a parking variance and come up with a parking plan that demonstrates some type of solution that it may not have the 200 spaces that the code is requiring, but because you have alternatives close to downtown with the Front Street parking and possible new striped parking on Stafford, there is maybe a compromise that could be had there. A variance was not requested, so we never got to that point. And a second alternative that staff brought up was that we do have in our code what's called a planned district. In this case, it'd most likely be PDC, planned commercial. In that circumstance, a property owner can submit a development plan with their rezoning up front. So it wouldn't necessarily be C3. All the uses and the setbacks and the parking that they want, basically the reason that they would want C3, they could promote a development plan propose a development plan showing 0 setbacks where they want to do expansion, or maybe if they're adding a pavilion, and then making some improvements to the parking situation, whether that's, like I said, extending the parking, working with the city to extend the parking on front, adding parking on Stafford, and if there's a way to close the gate and then have emergency access with, I believe it's called a lockbox or a knockbox that opens to a certain decibel in case of a situation. Those are all just alternatives that we threw out. It's not saying that, you know, it's not necessarily staff's position to come up with all the solutions here. It's just to say, you know, we understand there's a parking issue. We don't want to make it worse if they were to add a, you know, where the tent is a permanent structure for 360 days a year events. That could naturally have a detriment to the property owner, so we wanted to protect that in any way we could. So that was really staff's recommendation, to say, hey, let's look at some other options instead of just going to C3. And that really goes for the apartment complex as well. That is built out. Realistically, if that were to be redeveloped, because it's now in C3, it would most likely have some type of demolition and major redevelopment. At that point, they could come in with their own rezoning or plan. There's no increase to the property use on the apartments because it's in C3. It's already built out and completely occupied. And so that is where we stood with this recommendation. When council recommended to staff, why not go back and include these into C3? It was brought up that it couldn't be voted on that night to just add those properties to the district because the district boundary was set by planning and zoning. And so what we're here tonight is council directed us to bring that back to you all, discuss amending this boundary to include these 2 properties into C3, and then bring that back to council next week. There is a public hearing at the council meeting next Monday. That doesn't necessarily mean the ordinance will be on the agenda to be voted on, but it will have the public hearing for discussion. And so that's kind of where we're at tonight, and I wanted to make clear that there was not an application put in by the property owner to make this change. This was something that council directed us to do, and I do see the representatives are here today to speak on their behalf. But that is where staff is staying at now. Is our recommendation really hasn't changed from a year ago. When it comes to the uses in C3 and the potential development, yeah, I think it's natural that Elijah McClain's and this apartment complex could be redeveloped into something that matches uses and setbacks that you'd see downtown. It is the kind of the cap, the anchor of our western side of our downtown district, but that doesn't change the fact that it is nestled into a historically residential area, and I think it's only appropriate for staff to try and have some type of protections for the property owners to not have overflow parking onto the residential streets. We would do that on any other single-family subdivision in town. Just because this is on the very border of downtown wouldn't change our recommendation on that. So that's where we're at. I'll be happy to answer any of your questions before we hear public comment.
Questions, comments by board? If not, we'll entertain hearing from the audience. If you would so choose, please come up, introduce yourself, where you live, and please address the board and not each other in the audience, if you would, please. Thank you.
Howdy. I'm Dwayne Reed. Mark, is it okay if I talk?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, all right, I didn't know.
Yeah.
I'm the reason why you all are here. I'm the one that kicked the can down the road and poked the hornet's nest and got everybody back here tonight. I know the people that own the Elijahs, and they feel like they haven't been treated fairly because of not being in the downtown. I'm the freshman councilman here, and I don't know how everything works. I'm going to get a lesson tonight, I'm sure. But Elijah McClain's has got parking. In my mind, a lot of parking. It's suitable as it is right now. I've done a lot of checking around town, and the only other people downtown that have more parking than Elijah McClain's might be John G's and the Bank of Washington. Everything else, they might have a few spots here and there, but for the most part, it's all public parking. I understand the rules change if it's considered downtown. I've talked to a lot of people, influential people, business owners downtown, and I don't know how many people I spoke to, but I've talked to close to 100. And out of the 100 people I've talked to, Washington residents or not, I ask them one question. Do you consider Elijah McClain's downtown? And 95% of everybody I talk to says, yes, definitely. Why not? Well, then I have to explain the situation. And I still don't know yet why this is so hard. I understand it's in a residential district. I understand that Cedar Street's residential. Oak Street's residential. It's downtown. Is this going to pose a parking problem? I'm sure. But the people that I've talked to, the owners that I've talked to, have said that they have plans. They plan on shuttles, running things from, maybe the pool or else places to the event when and if they have an event. So I don't see that being a big deal. Noise, yeah, I understand that. I don't know if I would like to hear music I don't care to hear at 11 o'clock at night or 1 o'clock in the morning, anything like that. But they feel like they're not being treated fairly. And so that's why I wanted to kick the can down the road one more time and find out again why. And I know, Sal, you do a very good job of explaining everything, but I need to know more. And I know there's a lot of people here against this, and that's fine. That's why we do this. And I'm okay with that. But I've talked to, like I said, business owners and a lot of people around town, all over. And I just want to see how this is going to shake out. I'm thinking they're not getting a fair shake. That's where I'm at. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dwayne.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Sean Brinker. I represent the individuals who will say have an interest in the property. You look like you wanted to...
No, no, no.
Oh, okay. Sorry, you look like you wanted to tell me something.
No.
Like I messed up already. I was like, oh no. As Councilman Reed said, the biggest thing is my clients feel like they're just not being treated fairly. And they just want to be treated fairly, be part of the downtown district, the C3 zoning. I want to be real clear, we're not here to talk about closing the gate. I don't think that's doable for a lot of reasons. The biggest is safety. Also, when the weather is bad, I'm sure you all know that's a pretty steep hill on the front side. So you do need the other access point. I don't know that anyone really disputes that Elijah's is clearly a commercial entity and has been for decades. It's what most of us, as Councilman Reed said, think of as part of the downtown district, and they just want to be included in that. The parking situation, I understand that some people have a concern. It seems to only be a concern whenever something is going to get rezoned. I know that the old International Shoe Factory, everyone said that was going to be a concern, and you all may have heard different things, but I haven't heard anything since about parking being an issue. I really don't think it's going to be an issue, and I also think there are several ways to solve the parking, and I'll address those in a second. I had a good conversation with Sal today, and I thank him for that and thank him for his time and all his work on this. When we were talking, we talked about something that kind of struck me as interesting, and you've alluded to it tonight, is the majority, vast majority probably, of all the businesses in the downtown area derive their parking from off-street parking or public parking lots. Very few, if any, of them have their own dedicated parking. That's a benefit that the city provides to those businesses. But for some reason, it feels like Elijah's is being singled out to say that, well, you have to go provide your own parking. We know we provide it for everyone else in this area, but we're not going to do that for you. We want you to figure it out and provide your own. And I think that's a large part of why my clients feel that they're not being treated fairly. You guys, and when I say you guys, I mean the city, obviously, could easily expand that parking lot that's right there along the railroad tracks. You could get very close to Elijah's, create a lot of parking. You could clean up Stafford Street and get a lot of parking and alleviate a lot of the folks behind me, their concern about parking on Johnson and Main. Quite frankly, as someone who very much enjoys all the events that the city puts on every year and that the private entities put on. I'm kind of baffled as to why there's not more parking down there, because we all know whenever there's those big events on the riverfront, it gets tight. You know, when I go to my office, which is right down there, it gets tight parking-wise. So I think everyone benefits if the city does that. So I just point that out, that there are solutions, and it feels like Elijah's is going to be denied based on a requirement that the city furnishes to everyone else, but they're not going to furnish it to Elijah's.
Bring a book.
One other point that I wanted to make, Sal talked about sort of the purposes of the C3 or the downtown district, or the benefits maybe. And it was the preservation of the historic buildings and whatnot. If you wanted to make Elijah's have enough parking, then you're going to make it destroy part of that historic beauty that it has, the big hill, the view out to the river. And if the purpose of the C3 was to protect some of that, then this seems to fit right in with the goal of the downtown district. I think that's important to note. And really, do you mind going back to your other slide that showed the light blue?
The full one? This one?
Yeah, that one.
You want a pointer, laser pointer?
Nah, you're good. You know, talked about Elijah's being near residential. A lot of the C3 zoning, the downtown district, borders residential somewhere. So it's kind of unfair to pick it out and say, well, it's got some residential that borders it. A lot of this stuff does. So again, it just goes back to, is Elijah's really being treated fairly and being looked at the same as every other downtown business? I thank you guys for your time.
Anybody have any questions, comments?
Yeah, I'll ask one real quick.
I'll do my best to answer it.
You said you weren't treated fairly. Specifically, how was the process that was used to deny your request not a fair treatment of your client?
Well, to be real clear, as Sal said, we actually haven't made a request this go-round. A
That's
year
what I mean, the
ago,
last go-round.
I wasn't involved.
Okay.
It's the whole notion right now about being treated fairly and being included as part of this. You know, right now, we're being singled out because we're slightly to the side and because there's not enough parking. Every other business in that C3 downtown, whatever you want to call it, doesn't have their own sufficient parking. They all rely on public parking in the adjacent area. And why should we be any different? We can be the same. There is off-street
Are any of those businesses down there going to hold events that are as large or larger than the events in which you're going to hold?
Well, that's up for,
Very good.
Sean Mayall will talk a little bit about his vision for the future. I don't want to step on that too much, but I also want to be very clear that whatever he says, we don't want to restrict ourselves to anything. But, you know, there are tons of bars and event centers, well, I shouldn't say tons, but there are bars and event centers that do hold events down there. So, I mean, if you want to count numbers, I couldn't tell you on any specific
But those
one.
bars and centers are not necessarily on a border of a residential, single-family area.
And there is public parking near most of them.
Well,
I mean, you are an event center that you want to increase your number by putting up a permanent building, which is even more than, there's not a single business downtown that I'm aware of, even when we're having a major event. Those bars along Front Street all have that new parking. Well, it's wonderful if we could extend that parking, but I can tell you it's a major issue to go through Union Pacific to get approval of that sort of thing. But I think it's great. It's something we should strive for, whether we do this or not. But at the same time, I look on you as this event center is totally different than any business downtown, because nobody's going to have, what is the increased number of people if they put up a permanent, 300 and something?
Well, so I don't know the size of what was proposed a year ago. To be clear, there has not been a proposal to make that 10 a permanent pavilion. That was a previous owner. But at the time, You know, it's based on square footage. Our parking calculation is based on square footage and how many people it can fit
Right,
in
well,
there.
I'm just
So-
supporting what he
Yeah.
said, that I look on this as a little different than any of the other businesses downtown. This being,
Well-
nothing is an event center at the size of what you've got there, or what that event center is. But, you know, I'm just
Well,
throwing that in.
If I could respond to a couple points there. The plans for the venue may have changed slightly, which may dispel some of your all's concerns. But I think you also hit one of my points on the head, is that all those other places have public parking provided by the city. And the city's concern is that there's not sufficient parking. Well, there would be if the city would take the appropriate steps to create that
And
public
and that
parking.
is a possibility that has been suggested. I mean, there are all kinds of options here on this letter, sheets to do, that have nothing to do with the zoning. It has to do with their options that can be followed up on.
And as
But-
she said, I mean, working with the railroad is not
Well, I'm confident that's not easy. I get that. I'm not
it's not
asking.
just easy as sitting there, well, we can just go extend this and, you know, it's gonna solve everything. It's,
Well, I'm confident it's not like waving a magic wand. I get that. But I think it's, going back to the original question, it's that we are a business clearly in downtown Washington. And whether we're going to be treated differently just because we're a few feet over or not is where they feel that they're being treated
I think you're being treated different because of the different functions that you hold compared to anybody else in downtown Washington.
Well,
I don't think it's based upon, I mean, part of it's based upon your location, but I think it's what you do and how many people you bring in
Next
is
to a
the
residential.
difference of anybody else in downtown Washington.
Well, I can understand that, but, you know, there's all the other businesses that bring in people and that they do the same thing, and they get the C3 downtown zoning. And,
And I'm MERS Bay.
you know, that's our feeling on it. But also, if you're basing your decision on what you may have heard a year ago or rumors you may have heard, I would really kindly ask to keep an open mind, because those plans, like I said, I don't want to handcuff myself.
You've mentioned that numerous times, so
But
why
it's-
don't we hear what the new plans are?
because
I
some of it has been based
They
on.
will speak to it.
Okay,
They-
but I mean,
but
you
I
keep
wanna-
talking about that, so I'd like to know what the new plans are. I visited with Sean briefly on Friday night, and he was sharing with me, but I think publicly, for us to be, you keep talking about new plans, well, then maybe we should hear what they are.
Because based on what we've dealt with in the past, with, you know, the requirements and what they were wanting to put up at that time is based on what we're still thinking about now. And that's, if you're gonna, you know, want to come up with something different, you know, maybe it's time to say that, what's your plan and
What
what's.
is it?
And that they will, I believe, speak to that. But I want to be real clear that they are not going to share those plans with the idea that, okay, we're then going to go get a planned commercial district or a CUP or anything. Because right now, it's just in the brainstorming stage, and they don't want to be handcuffed into something. Even so, I don't think it has to go that far as, okay, well, what are your plans? What may or may not happen? I think you look at Elijah's and 600 West Front Street as it sits today for its zoning purposes, when you're talking about rezoning it here today. So,
But when you put up a tent that's requiring, you know, and you're wanting to now put it up at a much longer time frame, and now you're continually gonna be encroaching onto, you know, the neighboring property and stuff like, I mean, the neighboring neighborhood that, you know, is still a single-family area, you know, that still doesn't sit well.
well, I think it's a single family to one side, and it's not to the other side. You know, it is in that sort of unique side, but the whole western boundary of this touches on residential in some form, shape, manner.
I don't understand that.
Okay, and none of those businesses were being held to any greater standard.
They're not an event center, though.
There,
It doesn't really matter what they are.
Well, it does.
None of them
Yeah,
were
that's
being
why,
held-
that's why we look at it that way. I mean, you asked what, and that's what it boils down to, and that's what Mike was
Well,
talking about.
here's,
It is different than what we have downtown, you know? And yes, there is parking downtown that's been going on for,
Long
you know,
time.
years. But this, we're reaching out a little bit more, and they don't have the parking right now. Maybe we will in the future as a city. But that's the reason. It is different because of, you know, and we allowed a 6-month temporary tent to go up by permit. And there have been some complaints about parking and everything. So to me, you know, it is different. And I think to most of us, for me personally, it is. It's a different beast. And we want to make sure, and we ask for plans. Let us see what's going to happen, what's going to be there. Because once we do that, there's no going back. It's out, you know, it's out the barn door. It's C3. It's over.
why did you not come to this board or this commission when the original design was done 3 or 4 months ago and request that you go in at that point in time? Because I know there was changes that were made to the original boundaries when it came to this commission. When was that, August? September, somewhere in that timeline. There was some changes that were made to the boundaries that were originally proposed. And you could have come in at that point in time and requested to be included in there when that, and my understanding is you didn't do it at that point in time.
Just for clarity, when you say you, do you mean me personally, or do you mean
Your
my
clients.
Because I was going to say, me personally, I wasn't retained
No,
on
I understand.
on the project then, so that's why I was just clarifying.
Okay.
My understanding, and I could be wrong, is that they were, one of the parties was having discussions with city officials throughout the course of this. How formal those were, I can't speak to that.
We did get a letter after planning and zoning reviewed the boundary. We got a letter from the property owner that owned Elijah's and some properties in it requesting that, and it was put in council's packet, but it was after planning and zoning had already voted on this, so that request had kind of come through after the fact. Because if you remember, we only sent the letters to the people that were in the boundary we
Right.
created, and so obviously they weren't in it. Once the article got put in the paper, the owners reached out to us, and at that point, P&Z had already approved their recommendation. They sent that letter to council, and I think that's the whole conversation came up with council is why not include them? We got this request. I said, well, planning and zoning didn't make their recommendation to include them at the time, so it got kicked back to planning and zoning. And from our recommendation, we didn't want to postpone approving the district. We said, just approve the district as is. If you want to add to it, you can, because we did have permits waiting to be moved on in the proposed new district. So that is why it went forward without Elijah's in the apartment, and then this amendment got kicked back to planning and zoning from last month.
That helps, thanks.
And I think the board overall, we want it, you know, that to be viable up there. Everybody here, you know, loves that building and wants to keep it in Washington and keep it going. But I know in the past when it plans, what's going to go on there, you know, what's happening. So, I believe, right?
Yeah, Josh, we're certainly not trying to be unfair. We're trying to be fair, you know, to the, you know, everyone, try to be fair to the neighbors as well as you guys.
Sean, I just have a kind of quick question to clarify. There is no use that's either existing or is being proposed that's not already allowed in the C2 district. Now, I'm not talking about the intensity of the use, but there is no particular use that's occurring today or being proposed that's not allowed in C2. Is that accurate?
I want to say I believe that is accurate, but obviously I don't have the code in front of me.
So really, the only difference between the C2 and the C3 is with your current zoning, C2, you have to have on-site parking. And with the C3 zoning, you don't have to have on-site parking. So really, all you're trying to do is eliminate the on-site parking requirements. That's what I'm getting out of your request.
Well, I would respectfully disagree with you. There's a little more to it than that, and some of it I don't have permission to divulge tonight, but I can understand your view on that.
Well, I don't understand then. If you can allow the same uses in C2 that are allowed in C3, and you're asking to be C3, how is that going to change anything other than it eliminates the off-street parking requirements?
Well,
So what, and I don't know what their proposed uses are, and it doesn't really matter to me. If the uses are identical, and C2 and C3 are virtually identical, the only difference is you eliminate the off-street parking requirement. Really has nothing to do with whether it's C3 or C2. You could continue, I suspect, if you got C2 zoning like you have today, and we eliminated the off-street parking requirement in C2, you wouldn't be asking for a rezoning or supporting a rezoning today.
I respectfully disagree.
Okay. Tell me how that's wrong.
Well, like I said, I don't have a,
I'd like to understand it,
Yeah,
I'm sure.
not your plan, but just any
like I said,
different.
I don't have the code in front of me, but I believe there are differences in development, what you're able to do and what you're not able to do, as far as everything from setbacks to, you know, what you can construct. One of the big ones that's been talked about is the tent versus the pavilion.
And that was my point about the use is not going to change. The intensity of the use may change, that you don't have to have side yards and off-street parking.
Well-
So you may have a more intense use, you may cover up more of the surface area of that lot with buildings, but if you have an event center today, you can have an event center under C3. If you got a bar today, you can have a bar under C3. Those uses are not changing. The intensity of the use may change. I
Okay,
will
then-
acknowledge that.
Well, and then I apologize, when you categorize it as the intents of the use, I think of something different. I think of the tent versus a pavilion as development. But I get, if you're calling it intensity of use, then yes, then I would agree with you that there are differences. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you.
Thank you all for your time.
I just want to point out a similar, or an example. I know it was brought up, the shoe factory, and now that I have this zoomed out, I didn't bring it up before. And that is fairly new section of code from 2017. So that was only the second planned, that was planned residential, but that is kind of the same recommendation we had here. The circumstances for that were they could not have enough parking on off-street parking to meet the code. However, they had an amount that was, you know, maybe 2/3. It was close to it. And so in lieu of going to C3 or asking for a variance, they submitted a development plan that said, we're not going to have the exact amount that we need, but we're going to have as many as we can shown on this plan, and then we're going to add striped parking on the street. And council approved that plan in lieu of requiring the full parking requirements. And that is just something we said is that pink color there could be requested here. Now, there is risk that to the property owner, because they have to pay for those engineering plans up front before they know they get approved, and I understand that risk. But that, when the shoe factory was brought up, I meant to mention that earlier, is that that would be, our recommendation is you could go that route. That is exactly what was done at the shoe factory.
But again, the developer paid for all that.
Correct.
The city did not pay for that. The developer
Yeah,
did.
right. Well, it was painting the stripes, correct.
Correct.
Yeah.
Sal, under planned development commercial, there's a minimum lot size of 5 acres.
Well, I guess the residential is an acre and a half.
Right.
So,
Residential is 1.5 acres. Planned commercial is 5 acres.
so a variance would be required regardless.
Yeah, so this site
Yeah,
wouldn't meet that requirement.
gotcha. And just to be clear, I only brought up the shoe factory because every time there's a development going up, we hear about parking. Parking's always the issue. And then after things calm down, parking really doesn't seem to be an issue anymore.
But this has been an ongoing issue. It's not like this is something new that all of a sudden they're proposing like the shoe factory was. This was a whole brand-new development, and nobody had any idea what it was going to exactly look like, whereas Elijah's been an ongoing issue with parking when they've held these events.
Well, Mr. Mayall will give you some numbers that I think will bring a lot of perspective to the events and parking. Thank you all.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Mark, could you repeat that again about the commercial and planned development? I couldn't hear
under the code, planned development commercial has to be a 5-acre minimum lot size, but the code also says that the city council can waive that requirement on recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission. So it's not a hard and fast 5 acres. You can, as Sal said, you call it a variance, but essentially the council can agree to a site that's less than 5 acres on recommendation of Planning and Zoning. 1.5 for residential, it's 5 for commercial, but it doesn't have to be 5. The council can approve something less. You bet.
Anyone else that would like to speak?
Good evening, Sean Mayall, 2205 Windcrest Court, Washington. I guess I'm the guy everybody's been waiting to hear from tonight. Seems like I might be the popular guy. I'm going to be, just to clarify, is I'm going to be purchasing the property in the spring. So Tony Biquette owns the property now, and I have contracted with Tony, and me and my wife are going to be purchasing the property in the spring. So I just wanted to make sure everybody's aware of kind of the status and where we're headed. Got a lot of great ideas, a lot of exciting things for the Elijah's estate. I would encourage anybody to reiterate and look at the history of the Dr. Elijah McLean estate. He moved in there in 1839 and operated his medical practice out of that building in 1839. So lot of history there. I wasn't even aware of a lot of the history till we got into it, and interesting. And it's he bought that property from Lucinda Owen's husband, and about 80 acres. So there's a lot of history there. I know we want to separate the history, along with the zoning. But I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the history, the last year, 2021. I keep hearing a lot of people ongoing about the complaints, and this has been ongoing and ongoing. And if everybody would kindly remember or write these numbers down, the number 2 is very important. We had 2 outdoor music events in 2021 on the west patio. 2 events that we held outdoor music on our patio that we're permitted to do. In 2021, the entire year, we've had 4 events in the tent. 4 events in 2021. That's a total of 98% of the time that facility is not being used. 98%. So I want to be very clear about any complaints. I want to be very clear that as far as any issues goes, this is not an ongoing every weekend, every month. Yes, Tom?
Sorry, I will interrupt.
Yes.
I think the last 2 years, though, have been kind of unique in the amount of events that have been taking place because of COVID.
I would say that, but the last several months have not. This summer was not. I mean, everything was rolling again. So Anyway, I just wanted to kind of point out that, depending on what everybody says, is that the complaints have not been near what we hear and the complaints all the time. So with that being said, we have tried to be a very good neighbor. We are permitted to do, if we want to do live music outside, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, like other establishments, we're permitted to do that. But we have been an extremely good neighbor and conscious that we are in a neighborhood. We are next to homes. And, we chose to do most of our music inside and try to be a very respected neighbor. And that being said, so, the city, did kick this back. And, what I wanted to talk about is the parking situation that everybody has talked about. It's been already mentioned this evening. And the most important thing in the room tonight is that this property, whether it be me, Tony, is that this property does get treated fairly. And what I mean by fairly is that we do look at, along with city and staff, and work together on creating more parking. The city and staff have worked together with other builders and individuals in this town and businesses to create this parking. And I don't think that the property and the owners should be singled out, and basically you get your own parking. And what we're asking for is we're right at the edge. I don't know how there's any argument that Elijah McLean's cannot be in the downtown district. And what we are asking for is to work together. But I don't feel like that I need to submit a set of plans when it is very clear that this needs to be in the downtown district. And it's very clear and evident that the city, along with the staff, has worked with many developers and individuals before to create parking. We're all wanting to develop this downtown together and do good for everybody. And so what I'm asking for is to consideration to rezone this and that we work together, but I shouldn't be restricted to be able to do this zoning. What I'm wanting to do and my wife are going to do is we want to propose to put together a 3-story hotel right down on Front Street. It would be on the east side, so it doesn't block the view if you're up on the balcony or up on the estate of the river. And we don't want to do a large venue. We want to do a small venue to where we have small gatherings, about under 75 people, which we have plenty of parking there for now for those events. And, you know, we're not headed towards the large venue. You know, the large venues needs to be at the Elks and at the Casey Halls and those types of events is where the hundreds of parking needs to be. And we want to be treated fairly, and we want to work with the city and come up with a plan. Yes, Sandy?
Actually, I was stretching.
Oh, I thought you had a question.
No, I was preparing a question, but no, I was.
Yeah, and I would have to wonder, we've heard different coordinates in downtown, and I don't know that there's any that the building was built in 1839. So, yeah, we are up against some residential, but the argument is that's all the way through downtown. So we want to do different use, but I don't feel like we should have to submit a plan and be restricted and be backed up into a corner before we take a look at rezoning this property.
So I will ask, you talked about how many venues you had in the tent, which is very
Yes,
nice.
yes.
My first time out
Yes.
there this past weekend. Will that go away then, if you're doing all this other stuff?
Yeah,
I mean, will you be a smaller?
It would be either a smaller tent or a smaller pavilion, if I even did that. But if we build the hotel and if we do everything, 75 and under for like small weddings or small gatherings or class reunions, that type of thing, we're going to be a small venue. And so we're not going to need, tons of parking. Do we need more parking? Yes. But again, I would like to, I guess what I'm asking for also is, we're the ones on our side that have to be asking the city for parking options and parking. I guess I'd like to hear on your side is that, yeah, that's right, Sean. We have worked with other developers and builders in this city. And we have worked with them. It's always on our side for asking, but I think that's something that we need to discuss this evening. And, we extend I've looked at the property on Front Street, and I'm assuming it is tough to work with the railroad, but it was done before. It was done for other individuals. It was not paid by individuals. And we can work on Stafford. If I need to pay for some striping and we work together on that plan, that is definitely something that I would be open to.
We really don't. I mean, Sandy or Mark or Sal, we really don't do the negotiation for parking and everything. We have no funds we have available. So, we base it on what we have.
Correct.
What's there. The council may want to do that, I think, or you can speak to that, but I'm sure they're not opposed to working with you on it, but.
I know, but the most important thing, though, Tom, is for you to understand, because you guys are going to be voting on that this evening. So I need for everybody in the room to understand that we want to work together. When we work together with the municipality and work together, Sandy, we talked about that the other night, is working together. And that is what the city has done for other developers in this town. And we want to be treated fairly, and the property needs to be treated fairly, and we want to work together. We're not trying to do something, slip some zoning in so we can do something else. We want to work together, but we shouldn't have to have, it's evident what the zoning should be, and we shouldn't have to come up with a plan. We should work together on coming up with the parking problem.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is there anybody, I was trying to think, I remember recently we've just put signage on public parking, which is terrific. You know, the people now know. But I cannot remember the city, except for on Front Street, put in a parking lot with a developer, for a developer. I mean, we've had a lot of developers, and as mentioned in International International Shoe Factory, that was not included, and I can't think of any myself. And the other question I had was, which of course I now have lost, but if it comes back, I'll let you know. But anyway, I do not, I mean, I think it's great, and I think the city is more than willing to help, to work with a project, but I don't.
No, the parking lot, like at I mean, I'm just from my history of downtown, the parking lot at Front and Oak is a city parking
Right,
lot.
but that was not
and
with the developer.
That was not with the developer, and that was back in the day, and those parking lots were purchased and developed from merchants, quite honestly. They would all contribute money to buy a lot or to pay for a piece of property, and that was how a lot of buildings were torn down. You know, the mill was back there, I'm showing my, you know, the
Right,
mill
right.
was down
Well,
there, and then they
Ed
tore it
Bell.
down and made that a parking lot. A lot of those lots were purchased by downtown merchants as a group, and then given to the city, and the city took
then we
care of
have
them. The one behind the landing is a city parking lot. The one at Main and Elm is a city parking lot.
Right.
The Bank of Washington has their own parking lots over on Second Street.
And
I mean, that was kind of the history of how
Right,
those
right,
lots. Now, I
right.
would agree with you, Carolyn, the most recent lot is the one that was down there along Front Street where when they pulled out the railroad tracks. And
Yeah.
is that the one you're?
Yeah,
is that the one you're talking
that's what
about?
I'm talking about. And just-
Okay,
And
so
that-
now we know what you're talking about.
And that was
Okay,
great because that was tied in with the team track.
Right.
That with them moving, then we had access to that, but it wasn't, you know, and when that started, all of that Main Street development, Rhine River and all of that was just.
Or the Front Street was very
just a
infancy.
plan, right, it was not even there. And we only had one restaurant, we had the, that bar that was in the old electric company. But I mean, we didn't have a lot of, the development that we have now was not, you know, was not part of that.
Well, and that, all of that development, I mean, it's a TIF district.
Yeah.
You know, down there, and as someone reminded me one time, because, you know, the TIF district did what it was supposed to do.
Right.
It spurred on additional development.
Right.
Well,
And
and
you
I-
had
I
some
thought
big
of
developments
my
and
other
that.
question.
Yeah.
Is a hotel included in the C2?
It is, yes.
It is, okay.
But.
But the parking would be.
Then the setback, I mean, they'd have to be 25 feet off Front Street.
To answer your, Carolyn, I want to be very clear that I'm not asking for the city to put in parking that's for Elijah McLean's and marked Elijah McLean's. I realize that that'll be 100% city public parking, and if 30 people from Union want to come over and park there, that they can park there. I'm very clear about it would be public parking. And I think, Mark, to answer your question is, right now, I would love to put in some outdoor restrooms because we're a little limited on restrooms. And under C2 zoning, I cannot add anything to my building without going back and asking for more parking. So the issue is, there is a big difference between C2 and C3. Big difference. And I can't even add any, I can't add a storage, I can't add anything to that property without going back and be restricted and adding parking. And that's why we shouldn't have to ask or come up with plans, is we are basically landlocked with what we can do up there as far as any kind of structures. And our intent is, as you guys know, that estate, there's been a lot of years that estate has sat there and been run down and set vacant, which is sad for all of us to look at. And we had a guy that's put millions of dollars in that property. And as far as the neighborhood goes, where that beautiful hotel sits now was an old, ragged, rundown garage with weeds and everything growing up. And the current owner has done nothing but increase the value of those property owners up there by cleaning that property up, because it was an eyesore. I don't know if you all remember, but it has been an eyesore over the years, and it's sad to see the way that thing is set. And we've had somebody that's spent millions of dollars. I want to put millions of dollars in development there with the hotel and better this downtown district in this community. And right now, I can't build a restroom. And so that's why I want you guys to take a hard look at the overlay, the downtown district, and consider this, because we can't do anything.
Okay. Mark, does the zoning say no restrooms?
I'm talking about, let's use the word shed or garage. I cannot build any other structure right now without going back and talking about parking.
Right, correct.
So forget the word restroom. I was using that for an example.
Oh, okay.
Is Mark stated to Sean that there's no difference between C2 and C3. There's basically, why are we asking this? Because there's no difference. That is not true at all. That is, there's a huge difference there. And that's what we're asking for, is for the proper zoning district in downtown Washington. We want growth. We want to do this. We want to be together. We want to be contiguous with everything else. Well, that is extremely contiguous with everything else. And historically, I don't know if you can go back any farther on other areas in downtown Washington. So unless you tell me something else, Mark, I hope that I've clarified that there is a difference.
There is none, Sean. There is in terms of the use, you can put a hotel in C3, you could put a hotel in C2. You can build the same uses in C2 that you can build in C3. You may not be able to build them on that property because the property has reached or has nearly reached its density that's allowable, but the use itself is the same.
It all boils
You're gonna
down
run
just
a
to the
hotel-
parking.
You're gonna run a hotel in C2 or C3. The use is no different. What I said was the intensity of the use is greater in C3. You can virtually cover that entire property with structures and meet the C3 zoning, where you can't do that with C2 because you have to provide some setbacks and off-street parking. That's the difference.
So how do I add on and expand right now in my current district? I cannot do it.
You may have reached the limits of what you can do there.
But everybody else in the district can do that, and the city will provide parking. That's my argument this evening.
Well,
That's my argument, is we have to be treated fairly like every other developer in downtown Washington. That is my argument.
Well, you can use the downtown parking lots.
yeah, there's one,
They provide them right outside their business, Tom.
I think the parking lot was there before the business.
and Sean,
We didn't do it in unison with the
there are
businesses.
parking lots about a half a block away, according to that photo, and you were talking about running a shuttle service from the parking lot at the pool. So what's the difference? Why the need for a parking on your site? Or why the need for the city to provide additional parking when you're talking about using parking that's already there?
Am I forced to have to shuttle?
Well, you may. If you want to create that intensive use on that property, you may have to.
But I'm not gonna have an intensive use.
Well,
And again, if I was 100 feet from that, the city would provide parking. But that's a very
Downtown.
clear,
Not just for yours, for downtown.
For downtown.
And you can
I
still
was
use
clear about that.
You can still use that parking. So it's there for everybody.
And
Usually what happens though with developments, and you know this, Sean, you come in with a plan and show us what's going to happen with the parking and with everything going on. If we pass C3, it could not work out for some reason with you. You sell it to somebody else, intensity goes up, and it may be harmful as opposed to being good for the downtown. So I think we want to kind of make sure before we would approve, I'm not speaking for everybody, before I would approve it, what's going to happen as far as intensity. And yes, maybe the city can work with you with parking somehow, but I don't know of I can't think of one parking that was just done for an individual. It's done for downtown. I can remember I went in, they wanted more events downtown, for overall, There wasn't enough parking up above, and that's why they put those in. But I can't remember it being for just one individual business that they were doing it.
Well, and I just want to clear with the possible expansion currently, we don't know if it's at capacity because it's based on current use. If the event center is going to be significantly less, if our code says so many parking spaces per your occupancy load, if it's a 300-person venue, then your parking obviously goes up. If it's 75, you may not have the parking issue. That's where it's like if Sean were to come in with a building permit for just a bathroom, that actually wouldn't increase the parking at all. If it's dependent on the use. If it's bathroom storage and it's going to have maybe a place for a rehearsal dinner, well, then obviously we determine that at the building permit stage. We still review that in C3. We just don't count any parking towards it. So I don't know if it's at capacity yet, because if it is a 75-person venue, we'd have to go back and reevaluate the square footage. You may be able to add hotels are 1 parking space per room. So, there is a chance it's not at capacity, but we don't know until, plans. And obviously it's early, so he may not have plans to share yet. And that's where we were saying if you go through the variance, you could say, hey, we don't have the exact amount, but we're adding them on Stafford by striping it in lieu of, and that could be maybe enough. Now that goes to the Board of Adjustment. It doesn't go to City Council, but it is an avenue that we thought could protect the property owners to the west. So, but with the tent and counting those spaces, I agree that it's at capacity because there's not parking for that now technically, but it's considered temporary. If the tent gets smaller and it is truly 75 people, you may be able to fit it on there, but it all depends.
And let me repeat, we're not against improvements.
Not at all.
We're not at all against this. But I would like to see a plan at some time as to what's going to happen, and we've never seen a plan of what's going to happen on that property. I know it's hard sometimes, but when it gets down to it, the old shoe factory, they had to show a plan of what was going to happen before we approved it. Most of the businesses, if it's downtown, they had to show a plan before they're going to do. And most of those have their own off-street parking attached. Yeah. So
would it be fair, Sal, to say that we sit down and work together, and you and me and the city submit a plan to the planning and zoning about
honestly,
the parking issue? Not just me or the owner of Elijah's, that the city of Washington and the developer present a parking and a plan, because I feel like I'm singled out if you're asking from a plan for me.
I think the first step, honestly, would be submitting it, and working with us in our office just to determine if there is a parking issue. Because if the occupancy load truly does go down significantly, we may be able to figure it out with fitting it on site with what you have. Because again, beforehand, I think when that first parking plan was approved, it was for that all the square footage interior being a restaurant. And that is high count. You have to provide more parking. That has changed. It's not a public restaurant anymore, right?
No, it could be. It's set up for a restaurant.
Right, but we could sit down and look at a plan. If you can't meet those calculations, then the next step would be decide, do we go to Board of Adjustment with working on a compromise on parking alternatives, or a plan development where council waives that decision? I think there's 2 paths there, if I'm correct.
So do we sit down and we work out, though, because I want to make the neighbors happy. I'm not here, I respect them here this evening to voice their opinion. Everybody gets to voice their opinion. And they're fine that they're here. I want to work together with the city. I want to work together with the neighbors. And I think it's important, though, in those meetings, if we can agree, that we work on adding public parking. And again, working with Stafford Street. The sad thing about Stafford Street, if you guys are familiar, that street's dead. That whole block, it's trees growing in. There's nobody parks down there. They park up by that parking, but there's I don't know how many hundred of feet there that street is just dead. Nobody hardly uses it. And how do we use that together? And that's paid for already there. So that might be something that we could work out. But again, I want to work at it with the city, not me presenting everything and me footing the bill for everything when we work to get, the city worked with other people. That's what I'm asking. But I want to leave this podium tonight with a clear answer and a clear direction, so there's not confusion on where we're all headed, and you know, we're all on the same goal, you know, we're all after the same thing.
I would recommend that, honestly, submitting that plan to staff first to determine, we can't even tell you how many parking spaces you need in C2 until we see the plan. And then, like I said, we maybe, if you're really just a little bit shy, we go to the Board of, in my opinion, would be we go to the Board of Adjustment and say, hey, they don't have them on site, but we can stripe Stafford, and they meet the count. I would recommend approval of that all day long because you're supporting it right there. So I think that would be the first step, is us sitting down and seeing, because that was the first I heard on Friday was a hotel and maybe a smaller venue. That completely changes the parking calculations.
And that's what, we can't go on anything until we see a plan. You know, it's like Tom said, I mean, until we have any idea of some type of plan so that we know whatever density there's gonna be, then that's the only way we know whether it's gonna fit into the code and whether we can pass anything to go on to the city or not, city council or not.
Yeah, just as long as, Sal, you and I can work off of either a general sketch, because what I don't want to do is spend $100,000 on plans.
No, we don't,
and
you
then-
don't need that.
Yeah,
You
that's-
don't need
I mean,
that,
that's not
Sean.
what
I
don't-
think
no.
I think that this is, you know, the idea that we would work together. We would work with you, you would work with us. You would come in, you would talk about what you were planning to do. This could be this could be that. We could get some calculations going to see. And then, you know, it's going to be a back and forth a little bit. But it is not our attempt to treat you unfairly. But this board, as you can tell tonight, is going to kind of be interested in what you're doing. I mean, and so, I mean, when you and I talked, it was the first I'd heard of that. And quite honestly, I got here this morning and said to Sal, wait a minute, I think there might be some different plans going on with Elijah McLean's. We need to take another look at this. I mean, here we are taking another look, but we could go on, but you could solve a lot of this with just coming to City Hall and having a meeting and get those calculations going and then figure out what the answer is. We want to work with you.
We'd love to work with you. We like to see what's going on over there at Elijah McLean's. I think it's a good thing. I think everybody'd be happy in this whole room to work with you on that.
Yeah.
And I would much rather do that than to just do a blanket C3 and not know any other options, that we've looked at everything.
Well, as Tom said, if we make that decision, it's going to be here forever.
Yeah.
Right.
And so we're very leery about, especially since we haven't heard from anybody else this evening. So we need to hear both sides.
Yep. All right, well, then I'm going to head back so you can hear.
All right,
both sides.
thank you.
All right, thank you, Sean.
My name is Jackie Hollowich, and I'm here with my husband, John, and my daughter, Christy, who, I live on West Main, and she also bought a property on West Main. We are opposed to the rezoning of Elijah McLean's because it not only affects them, it affects our entire neighborhood. And I'd like to address one of these impacts, and that's parking. Many times, last Friday, for instance, I think it was on Friday,
Could you
We
speak
came-
into the mic a little?
we
Thank
came
you, thank
home at 8 o'clock, and there were cars parked on Second Street, on Rand, on Johnson, on West Main. And so what are we supposed to do, park a couple blocks away? My husband has Parkinson's. It's not easy. Our neighbor has MS. Walking can be difficult. And it's dangerous for them to have to walk that far. It's just really important that we're able to park in front of our homes. Some of us don't even have driveways. We deserve no less than a safe place to park. Many of these things you've already addressed. I'm just asking to please protect the integrity of our neighborhood and vote no on C3. That's it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Tim?
My name's Tim Understall. I live at 701 West Main, which is actually, we share a property line with the Elijah's property. And I want to start out by saying how much I admire Sean and people, generally developers. I think that's what keeps Washington vibrant. I'm not opposed, to the concept of development. But Sean, if you could put the slide back up with the colored parcels, I think the one before, I guess, the small, yeah. It's been, Sean and several of the people that have spoken so far said, well, it's obvious that the Elijah McClain's property is part of downtown. Well, if you look at what's there now, I think that's a fair argument. I think if you were to ask Dr. McClain, he might look at it differently. I think he probably built there in order to get out of downtown, but that's just my opinion. I mean, everybody's definition of downtown develops over the years. But I think what you need, and from what I've been hearing, some of the comments from up here, I think maybe you're coming to the same conclusion that I want to ask you to espouse, is I think what you need to look at on this parcel is not what's there today, because, God forbid anything would ever happen to that building or that property, but there, tornadoes happen, fires happen, earthquakes happen. The property has been in disrepair before. Who knows what can happen? And same way with the developer. I wish him a long and healthy life, but, he may not be able to finish with his plans. We all have a limited time here. So what I'm asking you to look at is, if that lot were bare, would it fit better with what's to the west or what's down the street 3 blocks on, to the east on Front Street? And then I think you're going to come to the conclusion that I have. It belongs with the residential properties, my neighbors here and my home. And so again, I don't know that I'm opposed to anything that Sean wants to do, but I think he needs to be held to a plan, and I think the planned commercial development, which the last meeting I was at, the attorney speaking for the then owners was just vehemently opposed to even considering. And to this day, frankly, that opposition causes me to be suspect. And, again, I like Sean, I trust Sean, but I don't know that Sean's going to see the end of his dream. Nobody knows. I could be gone tomorrow, but I think your job is to protect the integrity. And yes, zoning, I get it. Zoning ties hands. That's the purpose of zoning, if you get right down to it. So I think you guys need to keep that under consideration. So that's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very well said.
You got a helper.
Hi, I'm Erin Wesselschmidt.
Will you pull the mic down,
Sorry, yeah,
please?
you bet. You want to introduce yourself?
I'm August.
Hi, August.
Yep. And August has lots of little friends on our playground. We live on West Main Street, and we like to play a lot outside. And one thing we've noticed, especially with the event that happened on Friday, there were a lot of cars flying through there that maybe were late to the event and were speeding to get there and to park, and it made it a really dangerous place for August and his friends to play. So we just want to let you know, maybe from the parent perspective, that we want to keep our streets safe. And so the less cars, the less parking, the less outdoor strangers and outside members coming to there would make it a safe place for August. So, say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Hi, my name's Curtis Ozzie. I actually wasn't planning to come up and speak tonight. I just came to watch. But I heard a couple things that caused me to have some questions in my mind, and so I don't know if this is a format where I can ask you a question, but I'm going to just throw it out there. We can think about it, and you can tell me, Curtis, you have no idea what you're talking about. Go sit down, and I'm okay with that too. But a lot of what I heard so far tonight was talking about the premise of fairness. And what I heard this group, not everybody, but everybody latched onto what's your plan, what's your plan, what's your plan. No one else in the downtown district has to have a plan. And I think that's the fairness piece. If you look, hold on just a second. Let me finish and then you tell me if I'm wrong, okay?
Yep.
So if you look at that red square up there, where's the nearest red square on that map? At least a mile away. Are there any other red squares on Front Street? There are no other red squares on Front Street. So here's the example I'm going to put out there, and if I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong. I'll go sit back down. So let's look at the corncob pipe factory, for example. The owner of the corncob pipe factory says, you know what? We are done making corncob pipes. We're doing weddings. Can they do that? Do they have to come see you? Do they have to get more parking?
What are they, industrial?
For future plans,
No.
they would.
Do
No,
what?
they're in C3.
Future plans, they would.
Future,
They would be
Future
in
plans of
C3.
the corncob pipe factory.
But they would not have to provide off-street parking.
okay. So
That's a old business that has never had parking.
correct.
Ever. For their employees, they didn't even have parking.
I understand that, but what my point is that there's only one commercial business on Front Street that you're holding to that standard. So when we talk about fairness, everybody latches onto what are you going to use it for? I'm just saying, from my perspective, whenever I look at it and you talk about fairness, the fairness piece to me is, why is there only one business on Front Street that's held to that standard? If you look at the other end of the street, and this isn't a knock on the business on the other end of the street, I love the new brewery. They make fantastic beer, but whenever they went in there, I thought, oh my gosh, there is no parking down here. This is going to be a mess. I'm just, again, the fairness piece, that's my only point. That's all I had to say, is just whenever I look at that and we talk about fairness, everybody says, well, what are you going to do with it? How are you going to use it? And to me, that seems unfair.
Yes. I guess, when did zoning start in Washington? And how old is the buildings that are there? Because we didn't have zoning, before time, and those buildings were already on a plot of land.
Oh, that's definitely.
We deal with those. Every other development down there
Yeah.
has had plans brought before us, and we approved them, or we had some changes for them sometimes. So all those residential units, everything that's new built, like if they tear something down, build it back, it would be looked at again. And parking may be some of it, in the future, depends on the lot. But you have an acre and a half. If there's somebody else like the old shoe factory, we look at it, and we worked with them and got some, we'll take off-street parking. So to think that you're being singled out is not necessarily the case. Almost all the time in the downtown area, we try to look at the parking, off-street parking if possible, and if they never had it, we can't say, oh, you got to get it now because the building's there. There's no room for them to put parking. Like
So-
on Main Street, none of those businesses.
No, I understand. I mean, that's just part of being
That's
downtown.
part of the old
That's-
downtown before zoning and before all
That's
those
part of the
things.
deal. But I guess just to go back to my original question, because it was
Well,
a little bit.
to answer a little bit more of your original question,
Yeah.
I mean, before you can sit there and say how much parking a person's going to need, you need to have a plan. And until we have any idea of what they're wanting to do, I mean,
No, I understand that piece of it, but I guess my original question was,
that's big into the fairness of the whole thing, because in fairness to us, we need to understand what's going to happen before we can sit there and approve anything as far as any type of change.
Understood. But my original question that I got a mixed answer on, because you kind of answered and you kind of answered. So in that hypothetical situation, I said if the corncob pipe factory quits making corncob pipes and they become a event venue, do they have to come before this group and figure out how to make that work?
No.
Well,
It's already zoned.
it's zoned. They can do what, like we said, you guys can in
Mm-hmm.
that zoning.
So at some
Also, it's
point, not this group,
There is no residential near it either.
not too far away.
Not too far away, but.
Couple
no,
blocks.
It's not in a neighborhood, it's in a new development. Rhine River is a block away, 2 blocks away. But, I mean, there isn't a neighborhood there. I mean, if it turned that tomorrow and became something else, it still isn't a situation like this where you have an established neighborhood.
And that's what we're trying to do is be fair to everybody, not just to you or development,
Yeah.
but also to the property owners. And it's not that we're singling out a person, because you're not in the downtown district yet, special district. So we're trying to be fair to both to make it work. And we're not singling you out, but we are because you're the only one there with that piece of parcel of land. If there was another one similar to it downtown, it'd be held to the same standards.
Understood. And I will sit down quietly disagreeing and go back to my original point where that's the only red square, the only commercial business that doesn't get that benefit. And everybody's super worried about what there will be. So if Sean comes up with a plan and everybody says, I love it, does he still get excluded from the downtown district forever? Is that what we're saying? Or you're saying maybe you'll allow it at that point once you know what the plan is?
Right. Yeah.
But then whenever he's gone and somebody else buys that property and does something different with it, then you run the same risk you have today. So I don't understand.
If we do a C3 now.
Well,
yes.
yeah, if you do a C3.
Yeah.
So you're
But
saying,
if he's taken some of the event center activity away, and it's going to be a different use, we may not have a problem with it then.
understood, but then the next person who buys it.
They
But
have
then
the-
it's already
They come
C3.
through they come through the same channels and the same process as it is now.
Not if you make it C3. After he gives you
That's-
the plan, and you
that's-
make it C3?
But no, that's why we sit there and debate it now, is because once the property is rezoned, that zoning stays with the property forever.
Oh, I understand. All right, thank you for your time.
Yeah.
I just had
We have plenty of time. We have all night.
to help,
Speak for yourself.
Sean Brinker again, to help clarify
Jump up faster.
Curtis's point, I think what he was getting at was, when you guys decided to switch all these downtown businesses to C3 and create the downtown district, how many of those did you make come here and tell you what they're doing, what their future plans are? I suspect, but I won't swear to this, that the answer is a whopping 0, because you guys just decided to do it. That's the problem. That's what we're getting at, is why are we being treated differently? Why do we have to come and ask for it instead of being
Well,
put into it?
most of those businesses in that district already were in C3.
Yeah.
That it's not a new use.
Yeah, I mean, the shoe factory was one that got changed, or, sorry, the pipe factory got changed to C3.
From
There were a handful,
industrial.
but I think that was the whole point, as our recommendation was that they're not nestled into a historically residential area.
Yeah.
They already don't have parking, it's just allowing them future uses.
Well, I can give you a prime example, and it's the property that I own that does border the residential area. We were not C3. You guys switched our zoning to C3. Now, we don't really care, it's fine. But I could build an event center on my back lot, and I am right up against a residential area. You guys didn't stop me from doing that. So
Property is yours.
Zick, Voss, Pulley, Richardson, and Brinker, right down on Front Street, 438 West Front Street. And we own the back lot behind it as well. And you guys switch those in there, and my back lot borders a whole start of residential. So I just want to be clear that when you guys say, oh, well, this property's different, no, it's not really. You're just singling it out. So let's just be honest about it.
So in reality, you're gonna sit there and put an event center on your little property and sit there and have how many hundred people there, and where are they gonna park? It's like,
No, I'm not, but that's my point, is
you're not comparing apples to apples.
Yes, we are. I have a C3 that you just zoned right next to a residential.
You're not comparing apples to apples.
All right, well, we'll respectfully agree to disagree.
Yep, thank you.
Yep.
He has a house that's.
So my name is Sarah Marquardt. I
Could
live at
you
7
pull it to you? Yeah, thank you.
Sarah Marquardt, 701 West 2nd Street.
Thanks.
Probably live the furthest away, except. So I have a couple questions. When he talked about having a hotel or building a hotel, how many rooms? And I appreciate you saying it's one parking place per hotel room. But then he also wants to have events, 75 people. So then we're talking about 75 parking places plus enough parking for a hotel. And then we all keep referring to Friday night's event. So I don't know how many people attended Friday night's event. I worked. I didn't get home until 8:10. I have a parking driveway, so I'm okay. But I took some pictures just because my neighbors across the street were, who I know where they typically park, they were not parked in their place. They were parked in front of what is a garage, but it's a storage garage. But they had to park there because they couldn't park in front of their house. And then there was cars parked all the way to 2nd and Johnson, like to the corner of 2nd and Johnson, to whereas if I turned from 2nd onto Johnson and there was a car coming down Johnson, somebody had to stop to let somebody else go by. So zoning to C3 creates a parking problem. And that's it. I love what the development has done. It is definitely, looks nice, no complaints there, but if you're gonna have a plan and you're the developer, you've got to come with a plan. You've got to come with a parking plan, an event plan, whatever it may be. I don't know how many people are, like I said, who knows how many people are there on Friday night, but at 8:10 on Friday evening, Johnson Street was packed. I had to go around the block, so I saw how many cars were parked on Main Street as well, and it was packed as well. So, not sure, but definitely opposed to C3 zoning.
All right,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else, please feel free to come up.
I'm Gerald Stratman. Kathy and I moved to Washington and bought the house on Johnson's in 1980. We knew Ala Andre, who owned the old building. He sold it to a man named Dibby, and I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but he made the restaurant. He invited all the neighbors over and told us what he wanted to do. He also asked about a gate on Main and Johnson to be used for emergency vehicles and for buses that can't make it up the drive off of Front Street. And we all agreed, hey, no problem. We got along with DB, got along with Rala, and to the new owners, I don't know who you are, but you have been a good neighbor. You have taken a piece of property, you have fixed it up, you have cleaned up Calvin Lane, taken the riffraff out. You have done a good job. You are a good neighbor. I don't know of anybody here in this building who doesn't want anybody to succeed in Washington.
If you could, talk to us in the mic.
We don't know anybody here who doesn't want anyone to succeed in Washington. We're all welcome here. Personally, Rala was a good guy. DB was a good guy. We talked about the gate. We got the job done. This is from the letter that I got on October 27th. So in answer to that, rezone however you want, play the rezoning game however you want. Johnson Street and Main Street is still residential. We'd like it to keep it that way. If that's going to require closing the gate for emergency use and for buses, then that's what's going to have to be done with no man gate or woman gate, whatever you want for right now, no access off of Main and Johnson. We still want you to succeed. You have a gem on Front Street called Elijah McLean. What someone has said before, it's to capacity probably, and you need to utilize it for what it is. It is a good thing. So that the letter 11-8, which is the meeting tonight, you had a few steps. Add parking on existing property. I don't know how you're going to do that. Stripe Stafford Street. Yep, nobody parks there. Good idea. A staircase off of Stafford. Good idea. Work with the city. Another good idea. You also have closed the gate to public use on Johnson Street so that only emergency personnel staff have access to the residential side. I have had a neighbor, my hearing is not all that great, but they tell me sometimes the music is so loud it rattles the windows. I haven't heard it, but some of the neighbors did. So then you also have part of this page 2 of the letter, the intent and purpose. You say it's part of the historical downtown Washington. I wasn't at the meeting when the other family decided to do something with the International Shoe Building, and they wanted to keep it a good thing, and so far they have. But now there was talk of making the Johnson family as a historical site. The Johnson brothers owned International Shoe, was going to build the new building into apartments and keep the residential area and make it into a historic center also. Now you have downtown Washington historic conflicting with the International Shoe historic. And now Elijah wants to possibly expand. I don't know how they're going to do that. They can do that, like I just said before. I think everybody wants everybody to succeed. Draw up a plan, see how it can fit in, and I think everybody will be happy. So the last closing, I have one more thing to read, and it's the same thing. Rezone it however you want. Make it work however you want. I think we're all welcome here. Elijah McLean can be with the downtown along with the International Shoe industry, or not an industry, but the new historical site that the Johnson brothers had with the International Shoe. So somehow we can make it all work. DB made it work. The neighbors got along with DB, and everything was, and to the new people who own the place, you're doing a good job. I'm sure that we can make it better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're in the process of establishing an International Shoe Factory Historic District, but it's not done yet. There's a lag time, but it is in the works. But it doesn't affect any zoning or anything.
No.
Right, okay.
Hello, my name is Clint Schneider, and I live on Johnson Street. And I guess I have a question, first of all, and that is, the way I understand right now from the city codes that I've researched is that C2 commercial districts are subjected to some sound restrictions.
Just overall,
Okay.
there's sound.
Correct, just like any other nuisance
Yeah.
law.
Okay. So, I mean, can I just
Yeah.
this real quick? So, has this C2, like you said, restrictions, and then there's a table on the back?
And yeah, this applies to any commercial district.
C2 or C3?
Yeah, yep.
Okay.
Anything that is considered a nuisance over this decibel
Okay.
level, the police can determine that by a visit during when they get a call.
But they don't ever do that.
I couldn't answer that.
I mean, so I guess whenever I first saw that this was becoming an event center, I had the option of moving. We had neighbors that did that. I saw this restriction. I downloaded the free app that gave me a decibel meter, turned it on to what it was supposed to sound like at their property line, and thought, that's not too bad. I don't think I'll move, right? It's a lot more than that, according to my free app. Now, that's a free app from online, right? And it's a little bit upsetting on Wednesday nights when it's really loud and my kids have to go to sleep to go to school the next day. So I guess I was a little concerned. My question was it different from C2 to C3, I guess, if there was any difference in that?
No.
Okay. And then I guess if they really like to be fair, if they keep my kids awake, can I turn on my radio at 4:30 in the morning and wake their patrons up at their hotel? I like fairness too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else that would like to speak? Don't argue over it.
Yeah, just leap in there.
Hi, guys. Lots of old friends I see. Thank you so much for doing this. And, you take a look at this, and this seems like a big deal tonight. And for you guys, it certainly is a big deal because I got lots of money in the bank.
Yeah,
But
could you have your name?
I'm sorry. I'm Doug Hagedorn.
Where do you live?
I live on 719 West Main Street.
Thanks.
That's 3 doors west of Elijah's, if any of you guys are wondering. We bought the property 11 years ago, and Elijah's was basically a pit. My brother was one of the caretakers involved in keeping the building up, And we always hope that something cool would happen to it, and I think this is cool. But I also live there, and it is noisy at times, and it is dangerous when, like Friday night, the parking was an issue. And that's a big concern to me. So I do ask you guys tonight two things. Well, one is a statement. First and foremost, I think you guys bend over backwards to be fair, and I think you are continuing to do this in this respect. So for them to say it's not fair, I totally disagree with that. And I also disagree with the supposition that Elijah's is part of downtown. I just don't see it. Maybe I haven't talked to enough people, but when I was hanging out with some of you guys when we were kids, downtown meant, Borgia and the surrounding 3 or 4 blocks. Certainly we're expanding, and that's good. That's really good. And so I guess I'll ask you guys, just please keep a very skeptical and open-minded to both parties, especially us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug.
Okay, I'm Karen Parham, and I live directly across the street from Elijah McLean's at 111 Johnson Street. I ditto everything that Doug Hagedorn said and all of my other neighbors. We're all in agreement. I lived in my house for 31 years. When I bought the home, I knew it was a restaurant, as did most of my neighbors who have lived here 20 to 30 years plus. When it was vacant, it was kind of sad to see that. And when the new owners came in, I was excited. I would often go across the street on the sidewalk there and try to talk with Tony, the kid. And I was kind of surprised because all the other owners, or the people who leased it from the owners, were always welcoming us in the neighborhood, and we were like a team together. We patronized the restaurant, they invited us over, they cared about us, we cared about them. We had no problems. It was always an indoor event, which also helped, and it was a smaller event, it was a restaurant. So, when a business comes into a neighborhood, it's not just a business about making money, it's about relationships. And to have a good relationship, you have to work together and communicate. We have tried to communicate to solve some of these issues various times by trying to set up a meeting with them, writing the city council and the city administrators. I have all of that documented. But anyway, when it was a restaurant, the gate was always closed. Somewhere along the line, when the new owners came through, the previous owners, somehow they were able to work around it. We're not sure why, but we're not going to argue about that. Okay, the parking is an issue. I do understand that, I don't know what the right word is, if it's the code or what, that when someone gets to occupying a place, they have to provide so many parking spaces for the number of occupancy. So maybe if it's 200 people, they have to have 50 parking spots because it's 4 to a car. Well, I watched for hours Friday evening. I watched as people came down Johnson Street and up Main to get into the parking lot. I watched as people came by and parked on our streets when there were empty spots on the lot at Elijah McLean's on the upper lot. There were still empty spots. They were parking directly on our streets. How many people got out of the cars? 1 most of the time, sometimes 2. Okay, but I know we can't sit here and fight about we can't change the ordinance right now about there has to be, 2 to a car. Right now I think it's 4. But I'm just saying that's a problem. Okay, so let's see here, what else? One man actually parked in a no parking sign where it said no parking corner to here. He said he didn't care. There was also a sign, and I know my councilman Gretchen saw it and took a picture of it and sent it to me, that there was a sign on the corner of Stafford and Front Street that said, for FCBR, park here. And she took a picture and stuff, and there were only 2 cars parked on Stafford Street. And regarding Stafford Street, it is pretty well an empty street, but there is an apartment there, and there is a residential place across the street. Those people on that apartment that faces Stafford Street, their parking is Stafford Street. Now, that apartment building also has apartments behind. They are parked, they have assigned parking that they come in through Calvin Lane to park. But the 4 units on Stafford Street, that's their parking. That's the only parking option that they have. So, but I do think that you could utilize more of Stafford Street and make more parking. Okay, the other thing is, I know this isn't the issue here, but there, like Clint Schneider said, the noise. And it's regarding the events for 2021. I don't know. They said they had 410 events. That could be, that's probably true. That's what they said. But they also have a social drinking club, which has created quite a bit of a problem and noise in the neighborhood, especially on school nights. Cinco de Mayo was one of them. I was not home that night until later in the evening when it was all pretty well over with. But I do know, talking with a certain neighbor, that it was a problem trying to put their kids to bed. And on September 9th, there was it was a social drinking club event, and it was very loud. I could not have a conversation in my home with the windows open. I could not have a conversation with the person next to me. The music was that loud. Okay? Friday night, it was the same thing. My windows were closed Friday night. When I soaked in the tub at 10:15 at night, I could clearly hear the music playing in my house and exactly what the words were of the music. And that was coming from the tent with the flaps closed. So it is a problem when they have a large event. I have asked for if they could do something regarding sound. Okay, so, and like you guys did say, we did have an unusual year. It was COVID. So, what else did I want to say? About being treated fairly? We're residents. We pay taxes too. We live here. We work in the community. We are an asset to the community as residents, and we raise our family here. So, and we pay for our homes, and we're hard workers. A home is something to be treasured. It is your tranquility place. And we ask that you think about, which I think you guys are thinking about us. And when Elijah McClain's bought the property, they knew when they bought it, they are nestled on all 3 sides by residential. And residential, I'm including the apartments, okay? Because they live there. It is residential. It is not commercial area. If they're going to have a commercial business, be a good neighbor. We all together are good neighbors. We all have been good neighbors together. We watch out for each other and we support each other. We would like to see that relationship with Elijah McClain's, whoever owns it, as it used to be in the past. As far as being historic, I'm a big antique person. I love old buildings. I love old homes. Elijah McClain's, I understand, cannot be considered historic because there's been too many changes made to it, which is kind of sad, but it is still a beautiful facility, and I'm glad to see that it's alive again. And it's just too bad that they have isolated us as neighbors on how we have been treated. What else do I want to say? Let me go over my notes real quick. Okay, it was earlier tonight, it was mentioned that Elijah McClain said they could maybe do shuttles and things like that. It has never happened. Put your money where your mouth is. You know, walk the talk. Stafford. Okay, so I, along with my neighbors tonight, urge you to please deny downtown commercial. If they want to come back with planned commercial things, I think that's probably like the best way to go about it. We as lifelong neighbors love our neighborhood, and we want to keep it a place where we can enjoy the safety and the peace of this unique area. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, my name is Angel Mitchell, and I live in 3 Calvin Lane, right behind Elijah McClain's. I've been there for about 10 years. My front door faces the back of the building. Yeah, there were about 6 events this last year. It's one of the few things that I have to say thank God for COVID for. The 6 events were loud and caused problems with parking. I live in Calvin. I have my own spot, and I have one other parking spot. So my husband owns a car. So if we have friends or family coming over to our house, they park on Johnson Street and walk up Calvin Lane to come visit us. You can't do that if the entirety of Johnson and Second and all of the streets downtown are packed with people for Elijah McClain's. The safety concern that was brought up earlier, I have an 8-year-old daughter, and I also feel the same way when we're walking. We take walks, and if there's cars flying by trying to get in or out of Elijah McClain's, that poses a big problem for us. The slide is gone right now, but with the red dot that has been up all night. Somebody just now said it for the first time, and I wanted to clap my hands. I just want to point out the residential space around the red dot is all freaking 3 sides. It's not just one little strip where like 4 people might live upstairs and need a few parking spots. It's 3 sides of residential area. There's a lot of us that did not sign up for these late night parties on school nights with no parking and loud noises going well past 10 o'clock at night. I'm not the only mother who owns small children and lives in this residential area. I know that a lot of us feel this frustration level rising. So again, I say thank God it was only 6 events in 2021. If we're talking about doing something more permanent and bringing in more people and this being a more common issue, that's going to be a big problem for all 3 sides of the residential area. Let's see. Mr. Brinker was mentioned in the beginning when he first came up that Elijah McClain's has been a commercial business for 20-something years, and while that is true, it's also sat quietly for most of those years, and now, bam, we're now dealing with this issue. So that's the fact that it's been residential all these years doesn't have anything to do with it. The problem is that it's a now problem. So let's see. Oh, and Stafford Street, someone said it's dead. It's not dead. It's beautiful. It's peaceful. It's one of the few streets in downtown Washington that's a nice, quiet place. I sometimes park there before I go home from work. It's my transition spot. I just sit and park on Stafford, roll the windows down, and just have complete quiet for 5-10 minutes before I go home, and now I'm mom again. I love Stafford, but I could see how parking could be added down towards Front Street. We could easily put some stripes up there and call that good. Brinker mentioned his property and that he has a C3, and I just would like to point out again, though, that his little property space has maybe 1 or 2 residential neighbors. We have lots of residents, and none of us want this. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Just so we do know, it really doesn't change the use going to C3. It's going to be the same use as it was before. So, and noise is not really we're concerned with it, but it's more of a city issue.
It's an
Enforcement issue.
Enforcement issue.
So, and we don't enforce. Anybody else, please?
Jeff Westerschmidt, 807 West Main. You saw my wife and son come up here. He was more excited to talk into the mic than anything. So you mentioned that C3 doesn't change anything, but I thought before you said it did, as far as you can add more structures, more buildings, you can take that whole lot and make it
It's the
essentially
parking.
structure.
Yeah, it's the parking. So let me just say, I guess they could put more on it without accounting for parking.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it's the same use, it's just the intensity, like Mark said.
Okay.
So they could put more on it without putting parking to counterbalance that.
Okay,
Now they have to put parking in unless they get a variance for, if he's going to decrease and take away the outside tent and just use the inside, he could have plenty of parking right now.
Correct.
So that's what I was talking about.
Okay.
It will limit what they can do up there if you don't go C3 because of parking.
Gotcha. And so with me and my house, it was my grandma's house, it was my dad's house, and now it's my house. So it's 3 generations, you know, have lived in this house. And so my concern and my fear is the future portion of it is, you know, Sean's doing, you know, has great ideas, I'm assuming, and he's done some great stuff. But what does the future hold? If he doesn't own it, someone else comes in and they change that intensity, then it's a whole different ballgame for our residential area at that point. You know, so he's talking about decreasing that intensity, which is fine, and there may be, you know, tons of parking spot. But that doesn't tell us if it's zoned, you know, you've all mentioned before, if it goes C3, that there's no going back, there's no looking back. So that's my concern, and that's why I just wanted to let you all know that for us as, you know, residential, C2 is, the way it's zoned now is what we like and what we're used to, and scared of the future, you know, and how it can change up.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, I wasn't planning on speaking tonight either. My name is Christy Seawall. I'm a new resident of Washington. We bought 725 West Main Street, right next to my parents, John and Jackie. Their home was owned by my mom's grandparents, built and owned by my mom's grandparents. We really respect Elijah McLean's and the historical value that it brings to the neighborhood and the potential that it has and can add to Washington downtown as well as to our neighborhood. However, I think the real issue here is going back to the idea of equity and being treated equally. I think their current zoning is what determines that. If it's C2 and they have to bring their plans forward to be considered in conjunction with everything else that's going on, that's fair, that's equitable. When they bought the property, they knew how it was zoned. When we bought our property, we knew what we were buying and what that residential area looked like, including Elijah McLean's being a wonderful part of that riverfront area. So I think keeping it zoned how it is so that they have to bring their plans forward to get them approved and to get special consideration regarding the use and the parking makes the most sense to me.
Yep. Thank you. Anyone else?
This is last.
Hi, I'm Bob Engeman. My wife Gail and I live at 119 Johnson Street. It's the next house from the corner house from Second. I not really have anything new to say. I think everyone's covered it with the noise. Everyone's covered our concerns about the traffic, about the parking overflow this past Friday night, the abrupt leaving and coming and going that we saw. I really don't have anything profound to say other than I came here tonight to see what kind of information I could find out, and listening to you and listening to Mr. Mayle, it sounds there's a lot more information that needs to be exchanged. And so I'm glad to see that, because to make a good decision, you have to have that information, questions answered. And I'm sure my neighbors and I will be concerned as to what happens there, and as we should. I can't help but think it's a residential. We moved back into town. My wife had owned that house for a couple of decades. We moved back into town, moved into the house again, and because it's a great neighborhood. And we hope it stays that way. Thanks, guys.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Any other comments, questions by board?
Well, I don't think we have to make a decision tonight to approve or disapprove the C3 extension, the way I see it. we've gotten a lot of information. This isn't like we normally get a rezoning request or an annexation request that we have to make a decision tonight. I think based on the new information we've gotten, what we've heard from the residents, I think there needs to be more work done with the city staff and with the planning portion of it, talking to the neighbors. I would make a motion that we table this, if that would be in order, Mr. Chairman, till further discussion and additional information is brought forth.
I'll second that motion.
Second. Any other discussion, comments?
One comment, I guess, is, but that senior housing apartment, the only reason you're adding that is just so that that's contiguous with the Elijah's.
That was wasn't something staff added. That was the comment at the last council meeting. Why not include both of those? So yeah, it would be the rezoning of both, again, with.
Just so it's
that's probably
contiguous
at
is,
capacity.
just so it's contiguous across there is about it. Which,
Correct.
you know, okay.
That one, I'm even more confident that it is at capacity. If someone were to come in and redevelop that, they would have to do some demolition, some major plans to submit to staff regardless, just because there's not really any room there. And so that was in my staff report with both. If someone were to redevelop that, they could come in with whether rezoning to C3 at that time or plan district, kind of basically keep our boundaries as is.
So basically, that's really the only reason it was included, because otherwise, still, it's, you know, it's an R3, right?
Correct.
Yes.
I'd like to address the planning zone for just a second. I want to appreciate all the people that showed up here tonight.
Excuse me.
I sit on the city
Who-
council.
Steve,
My name's
excuse
Steve
me.
Solenchup. I live at 2317 East Fifth Street. I'm glad I came here to listen to these people, and I'm glad I came here to listen to these people. It seems like it's divided that way. I wasn't here for Sean, and I'm not here for you people either, but I'm here for the city of Washington. What I do want to say is it's a shame that C3 is not going to take care of their problem with the noise and the parking. It's a shame that C3 is not going to help him right now either, because we're going to table it. But now, I sit on the city council, so I'm not going to hear anything for a long time. I just want to bring a couple things to you guys that I heard at the city council meeting last week, along with Sandy and Mark and whoever else is here. Mr. Paquette, is he still here? Yeah. I had asked him at the last meeting, I said, hey, do you think, this is where we first started talking about shuttling the people from the swimming pool down to Elijah's. And we also talked about closing the gate, putting a new gate in there with a lock on it for the fire department only. Well, if they run their shuttles, I was just asking a question, if somebody can answer it. How are you going to run the shuttles up that steep hill with a locked gate, for one? And how are you going to keep the noise down for the people in the ward that deserve to be able to sleep at night? And those are the things that I hope that planning and zoning, or whoever's going to look at this before it comes back to the city council again.
Yes.
That's why I'm happy we're tabling it as well. 'Cause
Yep.
we got more time to think
And that's
about
why we're still wanting more information to find out exactly what's going on with this thing before we can make a
Well, we all
decision.
talk about getting along, right, Sean? Right, people? Everybody wants to get along, everybody wants to sleep. Well, let's see it happen. Let's get it
Yep.
done. Let's
Yep.
just not stand up here and argue about it all the time.
Right.
So thanks.
I think we can get that done, really. Staff has always been pretty amenable to trying to work it out, so it shouldn't be a problem.
I personally have reservations about tabling it simply because I think it's all going to come back. I mean, even if there's a plan, I don't see that anything I've heard tonight really changes my mind. But that's just me, and I'm just one person, so.
There is a motion and
There
a
is a
second.
motion and a second.
So all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
One.
Do we need roll call?
Need a roll
No,
call?
I'm the only one.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm good.
All right. Tabled for now and get together with Sal. Yeah.
I just have a question for Mark. Do we still have a public hearing next week, or since that's pulled? Okay.
No recommendation from planning and zoning.
So that way, no one needs to come next week. I just want to make that clear.
Yep.
That's fine.
Please do go to the city council next Monday.
Catalonia there?
What'd he say? He's
that's all we have for now, except we have some business
Yeah,
yet.
we
If
have-
you want to leave, we'll
Thank you
pause for a
all.
minute for you guys to leave. If you want to stay, you can stay. So, up to you.
Thank you all for being here.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can take that. He left that up here.
Oh, yeah, that's.
Well, it's not in order, so I'd have to look. This is special, that's for any special use.
Yeah.
It's in there somewhere.
Maybe
Right.
You going more?
It's in the zoning code. Yeah. But it's, I'd have to look, I don't think it's for C2 or C3, it's just in, yes, yeah.
If you could go outside, the doors to talk so we can finish.
There again, they're looking at a hotel, and they have all that parking. I mean, that is not, and again, there's no way to get in.
We'll start the meeting again. Mr. Scarnia would like to talk right now.
My name is Greg Scarney. I'm Ward 3 councilman. I sat on this board. Walt Larson appointed me in like 2001. I sat on it until 19. Prior to that, in 1972 to 1976, I was a subdivision designer. I did, like I said, subdivision design and plot developments for small restaurants and businesses. So I have a little bit of background in this, and I want to say you people are very well prepared. I want to warn you about some mistakes I made when I sat on this board. I only looked at the development that was on the agenda. I didn't look at the intersections leading up to that development. The city's now got some problems with everybody wants Rabbit Trail Drive fixed. We should have put in another lane there going south and probably another lane going north. It should have been, as Bob Dops calls them, a Class A intersection. Nobody knew that the development was going to be like that. I mean, that's not the worst intersection in town. I think 5th Street at South Point Road is much worse. Madison Avenue, when Walmart went in, we were told Madison Avenue was going to be a right in, right out after they put the Camp Street Bridge back in. It's still a dangerous intersection. I see people jumping 4 lanes of traffic to go west on 100. Well, actually 5 if you consider the through lane, 6 if you consider the turn lane. MoDOT said they were going to make that right in, right out. If MoDOT tells you something, you better get it in writing. I think there's talk about another right in, right out. I don't know what the name of the street's going to be. It might be KJU Understyle Drive, or it might be Ron Drive Extension. But that new apartment complex or duplex complex, whatever it's going to be, multifamily across the street from Kurt's house, across Highway 100. If MoDOT tells you that's going to be right in, right out, have it in writing. And I just don't let any more bad. My summary is I don't want you to approve any more bad intersections. That's all I got.
Okay.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg.
Sal, anything else?
Yes, so the last item is our code amendments that we talked about last time. We've already looked at this language before, and we never actually finalized on it to send it on to council, so that will be happening next week. So there's 2 changes on this section 400-110. A is changing that definition to talk about that last sentence, the intent of this district is to set potential growth boundaries for the historic district and to allow for mixed use and higher densities areas that are appropriate for the area and to be considered in downtown Washington. And then in the special uses, we added number 1, the first one, Any proposed zero lot line on parcels adjacent to a four-way intersection shall apply for a special use permit. Great example was right at Market in Maine, that all three of the four corners were able to get permits for zero lot line, and then after the fact, we had to reactively go to the traffic commission and add a stop sign after complaints were had. So hopefully this would give us a chance to review it, determine if the stop sign's needed before the building permit's issued. So.
You want a motion or any further discussion of Sal on the changes?
I'll move that we approve it.
Second.
First and second to approve. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved.
And the last thing is I am drafting our request for proposals for our comp plan. This should be, I'm going to have a draft for our just staff to look at this Friday. And then I will be directly soliciting, the language of that is nothing that we need to look at as a group. It's really just comprehensive plan, what boards or what firms want to look at that. And then once we typically will do that for 3 weeks. That may be one, since we have the time, I'll stretch it out to try and get more people, more firms to submit on that. And then this commission will be one that will have interviews with those boards. Most likely, I would say like a 6 o'clock before a meeting. We'll determine if you want to knock those out in an afternoon. I'll throw out some polls to people when that would be easiest. Especially if we're going to interview multiple firms, we may need more than an hour before a meeting. So that is in the works. The idea is that we would have that bid out in this budget year. In 22, do the entire interviews with the public and design of the 300-page document. And then 23 would be the start, because it is a 10-year document, and we did it in 2013.
So you expect the interviews to start happening after the first of the year, or?
Yeah, I wouldn't do anything earlier than that, especially if we did a 4-week bid process.
Right,
Yeah,
that's
so.
just asking. Try to stay away from the holidays if we can.
Yeah. So, the firm that we used last time is no longer around. They have either been bought out or retired, and so I know PGAV has already showed some interest, but that's the only one that I've talked to in the St. Louis region, so I would like to find even maybe a wider scope if we can set up some digital or virtual interviews, that kind of thing. So.
Sure.
Good. One of our big items to do every 10 years.
Yeah. And we have some connections that we are working on internally with city staff and developers to get, that are on the comp plan. We said we want to get those connections done before we do this, so we can say we can cross some of those off the list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, hopefully. That's not very low. I'm a tall guy. Yeah.
Anything else? If not, I'll entertain one last motion.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
All those in favor? So
Aye.
moved.
All right, thank you all.
See, Mike, this is more typical.
I knew that's where you're going, John.
We went ahead this after meeting. One of us probably could have got bought out there tonight.
Always,
Hey, they're still there.
I don't know where I was.
Exactly. We were just sitting here talking if there was a lot, big enough for zero.